The luxurious ballroom of the Ashworth Plaza Hotel buzzed with excitement as New York's elite gathered for the annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, while waiters in crisp black uniforms weaved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Richard Montgomery, standing tall in his custom-made tuxedo, surveyed the room with cold satisfaction. At 45, he was one of the city's most powerful real estate developers, and he knew tonight would add another victory to his list. "Everything is ready for your announcement, Mr. Montgomery," his assistant Marcus whispered, handing him a glass of champagne. Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on the main entrance. He was waiting for someone specific, Maria Torres, the head of housekeeping at his company's headquarters. What she didn't know was that tonight's invitation wasn't an honor but a carefully planned humiliation. "Did you make sure the press will be here?" Richard asked, checking his gold watch. "Yes, sir, all the major society columnists are present." Richard smiled, remembering how Maria had dared to stand up to him last week when he tried to cut the cleaning staff's benefits. She had marched into his office, speaking with an authority that a maid shouldn't possess, defending her team with passionate words about dignity and fair treatment. The memory made his blood boil. Nobody challenged Richard Montgomery, especially not someone who cleaned floors for a living. The invitation to tonight's gala had been his idea of teaching her a lesson. He imagined her showing up in some cheap dress from a discount store, stumbling through proper etiquette, becoming a laughingstock among the city's finest. It would remind her of her place in the world. But as the evening wore on, Maria didn't appear. Richard grew increasingly agitated, checking his watch every few minutes. The announcement of his company's new luxury development project was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and he wanted her there to witness it. The project that would demolish the community center in her neighborhood. "Sir," Marcus interrupted his thoughts, "Mr. James Wilson has arrived." Richard's head snapped up at the mention of his biggest competitor. James Wilson, owner of Wilson Industries, was a self-made billionaire known for his unpredictable business moves. The two men had been rivals for years, each trying to outmaneuver the other in New York's cutthroat real estate market. But what made Richard's jaw drop wasn't James's presence. It was the woman on his arm. There stood Maria Torres, but not as anyone had ever seen her before. She wore an elegant emerald green gown that highlighted her natural grace. Her dark hair was styled in sophisticated waves, and a simple string of pearls adorned her neck. She carried herself with quiet confidence as she and James made their way through the crowd. "That's impossible," Richard muttered, nearly spilling his champagne. James approached with Maria, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Richard, good to see you. I believe you know Maria. She's been helping me with a special project." Maria met Richard's stunned gaze with calm dignity. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery." Richard struggled to maintain his composure as other guests began to gather around them. James continued speaking, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "I should thank you, Richard, for bringing such talent to my attention. When Maria presented her proposal for affordable housing combined with community services, I knew I'd found something special. She'll be heading our new community development division." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he realized what was happening. The community center he planned to demolish, James and Maria had outmaneuvered him. "We'll be announcing the details next week," James added. "But I wanted you to be the first to know, considering your interest in the neighborhood." Maria said nothing, but her eyes held Richard's. In them he saw not triumph or mockery, but the same quiet strength she'd shown in his office. She didn't need to humiliate him. His own actions had accomplished that. The evening continued around them, but Richard barely noticed. His perfectly planned revenge had backfired spectacularly. As he watched Maria confidently networking with the city's elite, he realized she had never needed his validation. She had earned her place at the gala not through his mocking invitation, but through her own merit. Later that night, as the party wound down, Richard stood alone by the bar, nursing his drink. He overheard snippets of conversation about Maria's innovative ideas for community development, about James Wilson's brilliance in hiring her. His plan to shame her had instead revealed his own prejudices to everyone who mattered in New York society. Maria approached him as she was leaving. "Mr. Montgomery," she said softly, "I want you to know that the community center will be expanding its services. We'll be offering job training programs, including courses in business ethics." She paused, then added, "You're welcome to visit any time." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Richard to contemplate how his attempt to put someone in their place had revealed exactly where everyone stood, and it wasn't where he had thought. The morning after the gala, Montgomery's office buzzed with nervous energy. His employees could sense his dark mood from the moment he stormed through the lobby. Inside his corner office, he paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it takes," he barked into the phone. "Find out everything about Maria Torres. There has to be something we can use." His secretary, Linda, entered cautiously with his morning coffee. After 20 years working for Richard, she knew when trouble was brewing. She had watched the security footage from last night. Everyone in the building was talking about Maria's spectacular appearance at the gala. "Your son David is here to see you," Linda announced quietly. Richard waved her away, but David was already walking in. At 32, David Montgomery was everything his father wasn't. Compassionate, humble, and more interested in helping people than making money. Their relationship had been strained ever since David chose to become a public defender instead of joining the family business. "Dad, we need to talk about what you tried to do to Maria," David said, closing the door behind him. "I don't have time for one of your moral lectures," Richard snapped, finally sitting down at his desk. "She was my friend in college, did you know that?" David's words made Richard freeze. "We took night classes together while she worked as a housekeeper to put herself through school. She graduated top of her class." Richard's face reddened. "You knew about this?" "I knew she worked here, yes. And I knew about her plans for the community center because I helped her develop them." David's voice was calm, but firm. "What I didn't know was that my own father would try to humiliate someone, just because they challenged him." Before Richard could respond, his phone buzzed. Linda's voice came through the intercom. "Sir James Wilson is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Richard grabbed the phone, putting it on speaker out of habit. James's confident voice filled the room. "Richard, I hope you've had time to process last night's events. I'm calling because Maria suggested we might be able to work together on the community development project." "Work together?" Richard's voice dripped with skepticism. "Yes. She believes your expertise in luxury development could help us create a mixed-income housing model that would benefit everyone. The woman you tried to embarrass is actually advocating for you to be part of the project." David watched his father's face as the words sank in. For the first time in years, he saw something crack in Richard's carefully maintained facade. "Think about it," James continued. "Maria will be presenting the full proposal at next week's city council meeting. I hope you'll be there." After James hung up, silence filled the office. David stepped closer to his father's desk. "You know, Dad, Mom always said your biggest problem was that you forgot where you came from. Grandpa was a janitor who worked nights, so you could go to business school." Richard's hands tightened on his desk. The mention of his father, a proud man who had indeed worked as a janitor, hit home in a way nothing else could have. "I need some time to think," Richard said quietly. David nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Maria's morning. Business ethics class starts at 9 tomorrow. I'll be there, as a volunteer teacher. You know where to find us if you want to see what real success looks like." Throughout the day, Richard couldn't focus on work. He kept thinking about his father, about David's words, about Maria's dignified behavior at the gala. By late afternoon, he found himself driving to his childhood neighborhood, something he hadn't done in years. The old community center was still there, its brick walls now covered in colorful murals. Children played basketball in the court, where he had spent countless hours as a boy. Through the windows, he could see people in a classroom, hunched over books. A woman was tending to a small garden in front of the building. She looked up as he approached. It was Mrs. Chen, who had run the center since Richard was a child. She had aged, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Richard Montgomery," she said, straightening up. It's been a long time, Mrs. Chen. He felt like a boy again, under her steady gaze. So you're still here? Someone needs to keep this place running, though I hear big changes are coming. She gestured to the building. Maria tells me it might become something even better. You know Maria? Mrs. Chen smiled. She reminds me of another, ambitious young person who used to spend every free hour here, dreaming of making it big. She paused, looking at him meaningfully. Though somewhere along the way, that person forgot that success isn't just about how high you climb. It's about reaching back to help others up. Richard stood there, memories washing over him. He remembered studying in these rooms because his apartment was too cold, remembered Mrs. Chen bringing him soup when she knew things were tight at home, remembered the day he got his college acceptance letter and how everyone in the center had celebrated. The center's having a community dinner tonight, Mrs. Chen said, turning back to her garden. 7 o'clock. Maria will be there discussing her plans with the neighbors. You might learn something if you come, just like old times. As the sun began to set, Richard sat in his car, staring at the center's entrance. People were starting to arrive for the dinner, carrying dishes, greeting each other with hugs. He saw Maria helping an elderly man up the steps, saw David arriving with a stack of papers under his arm. For the first time in years, Richard Montgomery felt uncertain about where he stood and where he wanted to stand. Richard sat in his car until the sky turned dark purple, watching people enter the community center. His phone buzzed repeatedly, urgent business calls, his assistant trying to reach him about tomorrow's meetings, but he ignored them all. Finally, gathering his courage, he stepped out of the car. The smell of home-cooked food hit him as soon as he opened the center's door. The main room had been transformed with long tables covered in mismatched tablecloths. Children ran between the tables while adults chatted and served food. For a moment, Richard felt completely out of place in his expensive suit. Well, look who decided to join us, Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside him with a paper plate. The lasagna is excellent. Maria made it herself. Before Richard could respond, he heard his son's voice. David was standing at the front of the room with Maria, pinning large drawings to a bulletin board. They were architectural plans, Richard realized, designs for the new community center. People began gathering around as Maria started to speak. These are just preliminary ideas, she said, her voice warm and clear. We want everyone's input because this center belongs to all of us. Richard moved closer, trying to blend into the crowd. But in a room where everyone knew each other, he stood out like a sore thumb. Heads turned, whispers started, until Maria noticed him. Instead of showing surprise or anger, she smiled. Mr. Montgomery, perfect timing. Would you like to share your expertise? After all, you know more about development projects than anyone here. The room went quiet. Richard felt dozens of eyes on him, including Mrs. Chen's knowing gaze and his son's hopeful look. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. I'd be happy to look at the plans, he said. For the next hour, Richard found himself drawn into detailed discussions about the project. Maria's plans were impressive. She had thought of everything from childcare facilities to job training classrooms to a rooftop garden. But she had also identified potential problems that his experience could help solve. See this support wall? He pointed out. If we move it 3 feet, you could add another classroom without increasing the budget. Maria's eyes lit up. She grabbed a marker and started making notes while others crowded around to see. The tension in the room gradually dissolved as people got caught up in the excitement of planning. During a break, Richard found himself in line for coffee next to an elderly man he recognized, Mr. Patterson, who had been his math teacher at the center 40 years ago. Never thought I'd see you back here, Richard, Mr. Patterson said, stirring sugar into his cup. So you were always in such a hurry to leave this neighborhood behind. Richard felt shame color his cheeks. I thought success meant getting as far away as possible. And now? Mr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Before Richard could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. James Wilson had arrived, bringing with him a team of people carrying laptops and folders. Sorry I'm late, James announced. But I brought good news. The City Council has agreed to fast-track our permit applications. Cheers erupted around the room. Richard watched as Maria hugged James in celebration, then turned to hug David. The sight of their happiness made something shift inside him. James spotted Richard and made his way over. "I hoped you'd be here," he said quietly. "Look, Richard, I know we've been rivals for years, but this project, it's bigger than our competition. Maria helps me see that. She seems to help everyone see things differently," Richard admitted. "The thing is," James continued, "we really could use your help. Maria's right. Your experience would be invaluable. But it has to be genuine. No games, no ulterior motives." Richard looked around the room. He saw Mrs. Chen serving food to young children who looked just like he had 40 years ago. He saw David laughing with community members, completely at ease in a way he never was at Richard's corporate events. He saw Maria moving from table to table, making sure everyone's voice was heard. "Can I tell you something, James?" Richard's voice was low. "When I invited Maria to that gala, I thought I was going to teach her a lesson. Instead, she's teaching all of us. That's why I hired her," James smiled. "She sees the best in people, even when they don't see it in themselves." As the evening went on, Richard found himself drawn into more conversations. He learned that the teenager serving drinks was studying for his college entrance exams, just like Richard had done here. The woman who brought 3 different desserts was starting a catering business through the center's small business program. Every person had a story, a dream, a connection to this place. Near the end of the night, Maria approached him. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and thank you for your suggestions about the plans. They'll really help." "Maria, I owe you an apology," Richard started, but she held up her hand. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Montgomery. If you're really sorry, show it by helping us make this project work." David joined them, carrying architectural plans. "Dad, we're having another planning meeting tomorrow morning. Will you be there?" Richard looked between his son and Maria, seeing the challenge and hope in their eyes. He thought about his father, about his own journey from this neighborhood to the top of New York real estate. He thought about what success really meant. "Yes," he said finally. "I'll be there. And I might have some ideas about additional funding." As he drove home that night, Richard passed the gleaming towers he had built throughout the city. For the first time, he wondered if his next building could be something different, something that would make his father proud, something that would help bridge the gap between the world he had come from and the world he had built for himself. The next morning brought chaos to Montgomery Developments. News had spread quickly through New York's business circles that Richard Montgomery was collaborating with his longtime rival, James Wilson. Reporters camped outside the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had built his reputation on ruthless competition. But Richard wasn't in his office. Instead, he sat in a folding chair at the community center, his suit jacket draped over the back, sleeves rolled up as he pored over building plans with Maria and the project team. "If we adjust the zoning application," he explained, drawing on the blueprints, "we can add affordable housing units without sacrificing the community spaces." Maria watched him with a mixture of surprise and appreciation. This was a different Richard Montgomery from the man who had tried to humiliate her at the gala. As they worked, his phone kept ringing. Calls from board members demanding explanations, from investors worried about the company's direction. "Maybe you should take one of those calls," Maria suggested after the 5th interruption. "Your business is important too." Richard shook his head. "For the first time in years, I'm doing something that matters more than stock prices. But the outside world wouldn't wait forever." Linda, his secretary, burst into the room, looking flustered. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency board meeting in an hour. They're talking about removing you as CEO." The room fell silent. David, who had been discussing plans with community members, approached his father's chair. "Dad, you can't lose the company. Not over this." Richard stood slowly, gathering his papers. The weight of his position, of all he'd built, settled back on his shoulders. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. As he headed for the door, Maria called after him. "Remember why you came back here, Mr. Montgomery. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." The Montgomery Developments boardroom was packed when Richard arrived. Board members in expensive suits muttered among themselves, falling silent as he entered. At the head of the table sat Victor Sterling, the company's largest shareholder, and Richard's mentor from his early days. "Richard," Victor's voice was cold, "would you care to explain why you're throwing away 30 years of business strategy to play charity worker with James Wilson?" Richard straightened his tie and took his place at the table. He could feel the judgment, the disapproval radiating from every corner. These were people who had always followed his lead, who had celebrated his most cutthroat decisions. "Let me tell you a story," Richard began, "about a janitor's son who studied at a community center because his home had no heat, about people who believed in him when he had nothing to offer but determination." He pulled out the building plans, spreading them across the polished boardroom table. "This isn't charity. This is innovation. Mixed-income housing with integrated community services. Job training programs that create a skilled workforce. Small business incubators that grow the local economy. And how does this benefit our shareholders?" Someone demanded. "Tax incentives, government grants, positive press coverage that money can't buy. But more importantly," Richard's voice grew stronger, "it creates sustainable communities that support all our developments. When we lift people up, the whole city rises." Victor leaned forward. "You're asking us to gamble the company's reputation on a project run by a woman who was cleaning offices just weeks ago." "No," Richard countered. "I'm asking you to invest in a Harvard Business School graduate who worked as a housekeeper to put herself through college, who developed a business model that James Wilson, the smartest developer I know, recognized as revolutionary." The room buzzed with whispers. Richard pulled up financial projections on the screen, walking the board through the numbers. As he spoke, he saw expressions changing, saw the moment when business instincts began to overcome prejudice. "There's one more thing," he added. "I'm pledging 20% of my personal shares as guarantee for this project. That's how much I believe in it." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Victor stood up, demanding order. "You can't be serious, Richard. That's worth millions." "I've spent my life building towers that scrape the sky," Richard replied. "Now I want to build something that reaches people." Hours later, Richard returned to the community center. The planning team was still there, working under fluorescent lights. Maria looked up as he entered. "How did it go?" Richard loosened his tie. "The board approved the project, but they had one condition. They want you to present the full proposal at next week's shareholder meeting." Maria's eyes widened. "Me? They need to see what I saw last night. A leader who can bridge worlds and bring people together." He paused. "Will you do it?" Before Maria could answer, David burst in, waving his phone. "Have you seen the news? The stories everywhere. Real estate titan returns. To Roots pioneers social impact development," the mayor's office just called. "They want to fast-track all the permits." Maria sat down heavily. "This is happening so fast." "Welcome to the big leagues," Richard smiled. "But don't worry, you've got a pretty good team behind you now." As they gathered around the plans again, Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee and sandwiches. "You all need to eat," she insisted. "Can't change the world on an empty stomach." Richard accepted a sandwich, remembering countless other nights when Mrs. Chen had fed him while he studied. Now here he was again in the same room, planning a different kind of future. "You know," Mrs. Chen said quietly to him, "your father would be proud, not of the towers or the money, but of this moment right here." Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside the old community center, a small group of people from very different worlds worked together, drawing up plans for something new, a bridge between what was and what could be. The week leading up to the shareholder meeting passed in a blur of activity. Maria practically lived at the community center, rehearsing her presentation while juggling the demands of the project. Richard found himself spending more time there than at his office, watching with growing admiration as she mastered the complexities of large-scale development. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Rebecca Sterling, Victor's daughter and head of the company's legal department, had been watching the situation with growing concern. She had always expected to marry Richard and eventually control Montgomery developments. Now those plans were in jeopardy. "Daddy," she complained to Victor over lunch at their exclusive club, "Richard's lost his mind. This project will ruin everything we've built. Victor sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. Maybe not. The numbers actually look good, and the publicity has been incredible. It's not about the numbers. Rebecca slammed her hand on the table, drawing stares from nearby diners. It's about that woman. Haven't you seen how he looks at her? Indeed, others had noticed too. The growing warmth between Richard and Maria hadn't escaped anyone's attention, least of all David's. He watched his father transform day by day, becoming more like the man he remembered from his childhood, someone who cared about more than just money. The morning of the shareholder meeting, Maria arrived early at Montgomery Developments. The security guard, who just months ago had watched her clean offices, now escorted her to the executive floor. She wore a simple but elegant navy suit, carrying a folder of presentation materials. Richard was waiting in the conference room, reviewing last-minute details. "Ready for the big day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Maria replied, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her papers. "You know this project better than anyone," Richard reassured her. "Just tell them your story." "Our story." The room began filling with shareholders, board members, and executives. Rebecca Sterling swept in, wearing an outfit that cost more than Maria's monthly salary, and took a seat directly in front's view. Just as the meeting was about to begin, there was a commotion at the door. Mrs. Chen walked in, followed by Mr. Patterson and several other community members. James Wilson accompanied them, grinning at Richard's surprised expression. "Hope you don't mind," James said. "Thought the shareholders should meet some of the people this project will actually affect." Richard nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "Please take a seat." Maria stood at the podium facing the crowd. For a moment she felt the weight of all she represented. Every person who had ever been underestimated, every dream that seemed too big, every barrier that needed breaking. "Good morning," she began. "I could show you market projections and profit forecasts, but first I want to tell you about a place where dreams are born." For the next hour, Maria wove together stories and statistics, passion and pragmatism. She showed how the community center had launched countless careers, including Richard's. She demonstrated how their new model could revolutionize urban development while delivering strong returns. The room sat spellbound. Even Rebecca found herself leaning forward, caught up in Maria's vision. When Maria finished, the applause was immediate and thunderous. Victor Sterling stood up first. "Miss Torres, I owe you an apology. When Richard first proposed this project, I thought he had lost his business sense. Now I see he may have finally found it." Questions flew from all directions. Maria handled each one with grace and knowledge, but it was her authenticity that truly won them over. These hardened business people recognized something rare, someone who could transform lives while building profits. As the meeting wound down, Rebecca approached Maria. Her face was tight with controlled emotion. "That was impressive," she admitted grudgingly. "But don't think this changes everything. Some of us have worked our whole lives to be where you are." Maria met her gaze steadily. "Then you understand exactly how hard I've worked to be here, too." Later that evening, the community center hosted a celebration. The project had received unanimous shareholder approval, along with additional funding offers from impressed investors. The old building hummed with joy and music. Richard found Maria sitting quietly in the library corner, away from the party. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected him. "All of us together." He sat down beside her, looking at the books lining the shelves. "You know, I used to hide in this corner when things got tough at home. Books were my escape." "They were mine too," Maria smiled. "Still are sometimes." "Maria," Richard turned to face her, "I need to tell you something. These past weeks working with you, But before he could finish, David burst in. "Dad, Maria, come quick, there's a problem." They rushed to follow him. In the main room, Rebecca Sterling stood with a team of lawyers. Her face wore a triumphant expression as she held up a stack of papers. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party," she announced loudly, "but there's something everyone needs to know about this project, and about Maria Torres." The room fell silent as Rebecca held up the documents. Mrs. Chen moved protectively closer to Maria, while Richard stepped forward to face Rebecca. Whatever you're doing, Rebecca, think carefully, Richard warned. Rebecca's smile widened. Oh, I have thought carefully, very carefully. She turned to address the crowded room. Did anyone bother to check Miss Torres's background before handing her control of a multi-million-dollar project? I did, James Wilson spoke up from the back. Thoroughly. Really. Rebecca started passing out copies of her documents. Then, you know about Sterling Heights? Maria's face went pale. Richard watched her reaction with concern while confused murmurs spread through the room. Sterling Heights was a low-income housing project in Chicago, Rebecca continued. 5 years ago it collapsed during construction. The development company went bankrupt. And who was the junior project manager? She pointed dramatically at Maria. Maria Torres. Gasps filled the room. David moved to stand beside Maria, putting a supportive hand on her shoulder. That's not the whole story, Maria said quietly. No? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you changed your name afterward. It was Maria Torres then, with a Z. I have the paperwork. Right here. That's enough, Richard's voice boomed through the room. But Maria touched his arm gently. No, it's time everyone knew the truth. Maria walked to the center of the room, facing the crowd of people who had become her friends and supporters. Yes, I was involved with Sterling Heights. I was 24, just out of college, eager to make a difference. The company hired me because they wanted someone from the community to be their face, to convince people to trust them. She took a deep breath before continuing. 3 months into the project, I discovered they were using substandard materials, violating safety codes. I reported it to the city inspectors and testified against the company owners. The project was shut down before anyone could get hurt. And yes, I changed the spelling of my name, not to hide, but because I was receiving threats from the people I'd exposed. Mrs. Chen walked up and took Maria's hand. You didn't just report them, she said. You helped the families who had already invested their savings find new homes. You worked 3 jobs to help pay them back, even though it wasn't your fault. Rebecca's triumphant expression faltered. This wasn't the scandal she'd expected to uncover. James Wilson cleared his throat. That's actually why I hired you, Maria. Not just because of your business plan, but because when I looked into your background, I found a person of extraordinary integrity. But she changed her name, Rebecca protested. She hid her past, like you changed yours. Richard's quiet question silenced the room. Wasn't it Rebecca Steinberg before your father married into the Sterling family? Rebecca's face flushed red. Victor Sterling stood up, looking uncomfortable. Richard? That's not relevant. Isn't it? Richard moved to stand beside Maria. We all have parts of our past we've tried to leave behind. The difference is what we do with our second chances. David stepped forward, holding up his phone. While everyone's sharing truths, here's another one. I just got off the phone with the Chicago Housing Authority. They've been trying to reach Maria for months, the families from Sterling Heights. They've created a community fund with the settlement. Money they finally received. They want Maria to help them build something new. Tears filled Maria's eyes. I never knew what happened to them. After the court case, I couldn't... They never forgot how you fought for them, David said softly. Rebecca looked around the room, realizing her plan had backfired. Instead of destroying Maria's credibility, she had only strengthened it. In desperation, she turned to her father. Daddy, you can't let this happen. The company will be in excellent hands, Victor finished firmly. Better hands than when we tried to hide our own humble beginnings. He walked over to Maria. My father was a tailor who changed our name from Steinberg to Sterling because he thought it sounded more American. I've spent so long trying to forget that I almost forgot what really matters. The tension in the room began to dissolve. People gathered around Maria, not to condemn her but to express admiration for her courage. Rebecca stood alone, watching her carefully constructed world shift on its axis. Richard approached her quietly. You know, Rebecca, there's room for everyone in this new vision, if you're willing to be part of it. She stared at him for a long moment, then at Maria, who was now surrounded by well-wishers. I need some time to think. As Rebecca left, the celebration gradually resumed. But something had changed. The truth had made everyone's commitment to the project stronger, more personal. Later that night, Richard found Maria in the library corner again. This time, she was looking at old photographs on the wall. Pictures of community center graduates who had gone on to better lives. "I've spent 5 years trying to make up for Sterling Heights," she said without turning around. "Trying to prove I could make a real difference." "You have," Richard replied. "Not just here, but in all of us." He paused. "You know, I never finished what I was trying to tell you earlier." Maria turned to face him. "About that, Richard, there's something else you should know. Something about your father." Before she could continue, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Maria, there's a call from Chicago. The families, they're on a video chat. They want to talk to you." Maria hesitated, torn between the past calling her back and the future standing before her. Richard smiled encouragingly. "Go," he said. "Some conversations need to happen in their own time." As Maria hurried away, Richard watched her go, feeling both hopeful and uneasy. What could she possibly know about his father, and how would it affect everything they were building together? The next morning, Richard arrived at the community center earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well, Maria's words about his father echoing in his mind. He found Mrs. Chen already there, watering the small indoor plants that lined the windows. "You're here early," she remarked, studying his face. "Trouble sleeping?" "What do you know about my father?" Richard asked directly. "What does Maria know?" Mrs. Chen set down her watering can. "Some stories need to be told by the right person at the right time." Before Richard could press further, Maria walked in. She looked tired but happy, carrying a stack of papers and a worn leather notebook he'd never seen before. "The Chicago families stayed up half the night sharing their stories," she said. "They've been doing amazing things with their community fund." Then she noticed the tension in the room. "Is everything okay?" "Tell him," Mrs. Chen said gently. "It's time." Maria nodded slowly. "Let's sit down. This might take a while." They settled in the library corner. Maria opened the leather notebook, and Richard recognized his father's handwriting. His heart began to pound. "When I first started working here as a housekeeper," Maria began, "I found this behind some old books. It's your father's journal from when he worked here as a janitor. He wrote about his dreams for you for this place," as she handed Richard the notebook. His hands trembled as he opened it. "But there's more," Maria continued. "Your father didn't just clean this building. He was one of its founders." Richard looked up sharply. "That's impossible. My father was just a janitor. He barely made enough to support us." "By day, yes," Mrs. Chen joined in. "But at night, he and my husband worked together. They saw how many people in the neighborhood needed help. A safe place to study, job training, childcare. They started small, just one room in the basement." Richard began reading the journal entries. His father's words painted a picture so different from the quiet, tired man he remembered. "Tonight, we helped 10 people fill out job applications. Miguel's daughter got into college, first in her family. This place is becoming what we dreamed. Someday Richard will understand that true success isn't in what you take, but in what you give back." "Why didn't he ever tell me?" Richard's voice cracked. "He tried," Mrs. Chen said softly. "Remember those nights he wanted you to stay and help, with the evening programs? But you were always rushing off to business meetings, climbing that corporate ladder." Maria touched Richard's arm gently. "There's something else you need to see." She pulled out an old photograph from between the journal's pages. It showed a group of people standing proudly in front of the center. Richard's father stood in the center, younger and smiling, holding a plaque. "This was taken the day the center got its first major grant," Maria explained. "Your father wrote about it. He used his janitorial job at different companies to make connections, convinced business owners to invest in the community. He was building bridges long before any of us." Richard stared at the photo, memories flooding back. The nights his father came home late, not just tired from cleaning but energized despite the hour. The proud look in his eyes that Richard had always mistaken for simple fatigue. The way he tried to talk about the center, about community, about what really mattered. "The night he died," Richard said slowly, "he asked me to come here, said he had something important to tell me, but I was too busy. Had a big merger meeting. The next day, he wanted to show you this." Mrs. Chen held up another document. a deed. He left his shares in the center to you, not much financially, but a piece of everything he built here. The lawyer tried to contact you, but I was too busy moving forward to look back, Richard finished. He looked around the room with new eyes, seeing his father's legacy in every corner. The door opened and David walked in, stopping short when he saw the group's serious faces. "What's going on?" "Your grandfather," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, "was more than we ever knew." He handed the journal to his son. As David read, Maria quietly explained about finding the journal, about discovering the connection between her current project and the work Richard's father had done decades ago. "So that's why this place felt so right," David said wonderingly. "It's in our blood." Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The morning sun illuminated the garden outside. The same garden his father had started 40 years ago, now tended by a new generation of dreamers. "I've been so wrong," he said. "All these years I thought I was building something new, but I was just recreating his vision without even knowing it." Maria joined him at the window. "That's why this project matters so much. It's not just about building new walls, it's about continuing what your father started, building bridges between people, between worlds." "The businessman and the cleaner," Richard said softly, looking at Maria. "Just like my father, moving between worlds, seeing the value in both." Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "Some things skip a generation. Your father would be happy to see his son finally understanding." Just then, Rebecca Sterling walked in, looking uncertain. She carried a thick folder labeled Montgomery Center Archives. I've been doing more research," she said hesitantly. "There's something else you should see about your father, Richard, about all of our fathers." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder on the library table. Everyone gathered around as she spread out yellowed newspaper clippings, old photographs and faded documents. "After last night, I couldn't sleep," she explained. "I went to the city archives, started digging into the history of this neighborhood, this center, and I found this." She pointed to a newspaper article from 1975. The headline read, "Local Workers Unite to Save Community." Below was a photograph that made Richard's breath catch. His father stood with a group of men, including a younger Victor Sterling and James Wilson's father. "They all worked here," Rebecca continued. "Your father as the janitor, my father as a bookkeeper before he changed our name, and James's father as the maintenance man. They weren't just employees, they were friends." Maria leaned in to read the article. It says they organized a fundraiser when the center was about to be shut down. They saved it together. "My father never told me," Rebecca said softly. "He always said we came from old money, that we were better than—" She stopped, looking ashamed. "Better than people like me?" Maria asked gently. "People who clean buildings and dream of something more?" Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes. "I found my father's old journals too. He wrote about your father, Richard, called him the wisest man he knew. They used to meet here after work, planning ways to help people while keeping their day jobs." Richard picked up another photograph. In it, the three men sat at a beat-up table, sharing coffee and laughing. They looked so young, so unburdened by the weight of status and expectations. "But something happened," Rebecca continued. "There was a falling out. The papers don't say what, but after that they all went their separate ways. My father changed our name, moved us to the wealthy side of town. He never mentioned this place again." Mrs. Chen had been listening quietly. "Now," she spoke up, "I remember that time. Your fathers had different ideas about how to help people. Victor, Mr. Sterling, wanted to buy up properties, demolish them for new development. He said it was for the greater good. But Richard's father believed in preserving the community, helping people build from within." "And James's father?" David asked. "He tried to keep the peace," Mrs. Chen sighed. "But in the end he had to choose sides. The center stayed, but the friendship was broken." Maria touched one of the photographs thoughtfully. "So that's why this project matters so much to everyone. It's not just about building something new, it's about healing something old." "There's more," Rebecca said, pulling out a legal document. "The original deed to this property. It was jointly owned by all three men. They never dissolved the partnership. Legally, the Montgomery, Sterling, and Wilson families still share ownership of this land. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. All their recent conflicts, the competition between their companies, the social divisions they'd maintained, all of it had been built on a forgotten foundation of friendship and shared purpose. Richard sat down heavily, holding his father's journal. All these years, we've been fighting over who could build the biggest towers, make the most money, and right here under our feet was the real legacy they wanted us to continue. Maybe that's why our paths kept crossing, Maria suggested. Some stories need to come full circle before they can move forward. Just then, James Wilson walked in. He stopped short when he saw everyone gathered around the old documents. "James," Richard called, "there's something you need to see about your father." As James joined them, Rebecca explained her discoveries. His face showed the same mix of surprise, pain, and understanding that they had all experienced. "My father used to say that true wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you share," James said, quietly. I never fully understood what he meant until now. David had been studying the legal documents. "You know what this means? The new project, it's not just a collaboration, it's a reunion. We're finally finishing what they started." Maria looked around at these people who had become so much more than colleagues. "But this time, we're doing it together. No more choosing sides." Rebecca stood up straighter, wiping her eyes. "I need to tell my father about this. He should know, so we all should know where we really came from." "We'll go together," Richard decided. "All of us. It's time to bridge more than just neighborhoods." Mrs. Chen watched them with satisfaction. "Your fathers used to sit in this very room, sharing dreams over coffee. Now here you all are, finally understanding what they tried to teach you." As if on cue, the morning sun broke through the windows, illuminating the old photographs. 3. Young men smiled up from the past, their friendship preserved in faded color, their dreams waiting to be rediscovered by their children. "You know what this means?" David picked up the original deed. "Legally, none of our companies can move forward with any plans without all three families agreeing." "Maybe that's exactly what our fathers wanted," James suggested, "to make sure that someday we'd have to work together again." Maria touched Richard's arm gently. "Like your father wrote, true success isn't in what you take, but in what you give back." As they gathered the documents, making plans to visit Victor Sterling together, Richard noticed something else fall from his father's journal, a sealed envelope with his name on it, in his father's handwriting. The paper was aged, but the seal was intact. His hands trembling slightly, Richard picked up the letter that had waited so many years to be read. The room grew quiet as Richard held the envelope. His father's familiar handwriting brought back a flood of memories. Homework, checked at the kitchen table, birthday cards, the last note he'd left saying he was working late at the center. That was the night he died. "Do you want us to leave?" Maria asked softly. Richard shook his head. "No. Whatever's in here, I think we're all meant to hear it." With careful fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed pages. His father's words written decades ago filled the paper. "My dear Richard, if you're reading this, it means you've finally found your way back to the center, back to the truth about our family's legacy. I've tried to tell you so many times, but you were always running towards something else, something bigger. Maybe that's my fault. I wanted you to have more than I did, but somewhere along the way, I failed to show you what more really means. You. See, this center isn't just a building. It's a promise we made, Victor, James Sr. and I. We came from nothing, worked whatever jobs we could find, but we shared a dream of making life better for our community. Victor kept the books, James fixed what was broken, and I kept it all clean and running. We were the night shift dreamers, planning a better future while the rest of the world slept. The night we signed the deed, we made a pact. No matter what happened, this place would stand as a bridge between worlds, helping people cross from where they are to where they dream of being. We promised our children would know the value of both sides of that bridge. But dreams have a way of changing people. Victor started seeing dollar signs instead of faces. He talked about progress that pushed people out instead of lifting them up. The night it all fell apart, he brought developers here, planned to sell the center for a luxury project. James Sr. and I couldn't let that happen. We had promised too many people a place to build their dreams. The fight that followed broke more than our friendship. It broke our shared vision. Victor took his business skills and built his empire. James Sr. focused on his family and his honest work. And I stayed here, keeping the lights on, watching you grow up and wondering if I'd failed to give you the most important inheritance, the understanding that true wealth isn't in buildings or bank accounts, but in the lives you touch. But I never lost hope. I kept this letter and the deed safe, believing that someday you would find your way back. That someday you would understand why I chose to remain a janitor, even when Victor offered me a corporate job, why I spent my evenings teaching adults to read instead of chasing promotions. If you're reading this now, look around you. Every corner of this place holds someone's dream. The study room where single mothers earn their degrees while their children sleep nearby. The workshop where laid-off workers learn new trades. The garden where seniors teach young people about patience and growth. This is the real skyline of our city. Not the towers that scrape the clouds, but the bridges we build between people. I don't know what kind of man you've become, my son. But I hope you're reading this because something led you back here. Back to the truth about what success really means. The deed you've discovered isn't just a legal document. It's a second chance. For you, for Victor's child, for James's son. A chance to rebuild not just buildings, but the bridges between worlds that we once dreamed of. There's a quote your mother loved. "We rise by lifting others." She understood better than anyone that real power isn't in how high you climb, but in how many people you bring with you. I'm leaving you my shares in this center, not because they're worth money, but because they're worth everything that matters. What you do with this legacy is your choice. But remember, the greatest towers mean nothing if they cast shadows over people's dreams. With hope and love, your father. Richard's voice broke as he finished reading. The room was silent, except for quiet sniffles, Rebecca wiping away tears, David trying to maintain composure, Mrs. Chen nodding with remembered wisdom. Maria touched the letter gently. He knew. Somehow he knew that someday you'd all find your way back here. Not just us, Richard said, looking at her. People like you, too. People who understand both sides of the bridge he talked about. James picked up one of the old photographs. Our fathers weren't just business partners. They were trying to show us a different way of measuring success. And we almost missed it, Rebecca added softly. Too busy fighting over who owned the skyline to see the foundation they built. Mrs. Chen stood up, her face determined. Well, you see it now. The question is, what will you do with this understanding? Before anyone could answer, Linda burst into the room, her face pale with urgency. Richard, you need to turn on the news now. David grabbed his phone, pulling up a news live stream. The headline made everyone gasp. Breaking, Victor Sterling suffers heart attack during emergency board meeting. Rebecca's knees buckled. Richard caught her before she fell. We need to get to the hospital, she whispered. We'll all go, Maria decided, already gathering their coats. As they rushed out, Richard carefully folded his father's letter and put it in his pocket, next to his heart. The weight of it felt like a compass, finally pointing him in the right direction. In the elevator, Rebecca gripped Richard's hand. Dad was going to announce something big at that board meeting. Something about the center, about making things right. Then we'll make sure he gets the chance, Richard promised, watching the floors tick down. Outside, the city sparkled in the morning sun. Somewhere between the towers and shadows, bridges waited to be built, just as 3 night shift dreamers had imagined so long ago. The hospital waiting room buzzed with tension as doctors worked to stabilize Victor Sterling. Rebecca paced nervously while Richard, Maria, and James sat together, the weight of their father's letter still fresh in their minds. He was trying to tell me something this morning, Rebecca said, stopping her pacing. He called, wanted to meet, before the board meeting, but I was too busy preparing legal documents for fighting us, Richard finished gently. We've all been too busy fighting. A doctor emerged from the emergency room and everyone stood up. Mr. Sterling is stable, she announced. He's asking for his daughter and Richard Montgomery. Rebecca. And Richard exchanged glances before following the doctor. In the hospital room, Victor looked smaller somehow, vulnerable against the white sheets. His eyes opened as they approached. The letter, he said weakly. You found it? Richard blinked in surprise. You knew about it? Of course I knew. Victor's voice grew stronger. Your father showed it to me years ago, made me promise to help you find your way back when the time was right. That's what I was going to announce today, returning the Sterling family's shares of the center back to the community trust. Rebecca gasped. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed, Victor admitted. I let greed change me, hurt the best friends I ever had. But watching you all these past weeks, seeing the center coming back to life, I knew it was time. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Maria sat with Mrs. Chen, who had arrived bringing coffee for everyone. You know, Mrs. Chen said, Richard's father wasn't the only one who left a letter. She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 more envelopes, aged just like Richard's father's letter. James Sr. and Victor left these too. They made me promise to keep them safe until they were needed. James took his father's letter with trembling hands. Like Richard's, it told a story of friendship, dreams, and hope for the future. Victor's letter, which Mrs. Chen saved for Rebecca, contained a confession and a plea for forgiveness. When Richard and Rebecca returned to the waiting room, their faces showed both relief and purpose. Dad's going to be okay, Rebecca announced, and there's something we need to do. 1 month later, the community center buzzed with excitement. Television crews set up their equipment as people filled every available seat. On stage, photographs of 3 young men were displayed prominently. Richard's father, James Sr., and Victor, in their days as the night shift dreamers. Richard stood at the podium, Maria by his side, while Rebecca, James, and David sat with Victor, who had insisted on leaving the hospital for this moment. 30 years ago, 3 men had a dream, Richard began. They believed that success wasn't measured by how high you could climb, but by how many people you could lift up with you. Today, we're not just honoring their dream, we're expanding it. He gestured to the architectural plans displayed behind him. The new Montgomery Sterling Wilson Community Development Trust will transform not just this neighborhood, but our entire approach to urban development. Every luxury project we build will fund community programs. Every new tower will create opportunities for education, job training, and small business support. Maria stepped forward. We're not just building buildings, we're building bridges. Between communities, between opportunities, between dreams. Rebecca joined them, her voice strong with conviction. The Sterling Foundation is dedicating its resources to support scholarship programs, ensuring that everyone has the chance to rise. James stood next. And Wilson Industries will provide job training and employment opportunities, creating real pathways to success. Victor struggled to his feet, supported by David. We lost our way once, he said, his voice carrying despite its weakness. But our children found it back. Today we're rebuilding more than buildings. We're rebuilding faith in the idea that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. As applause filled the room, Mrs. Chen watched from the back, tears in her eyes. Beside her, Sarah, one of the center's cleaning staff, watched in wonder. Do you think I could ever? Sarah started to ask. Take these, Mrs. Chen handed her some college applications. Maria already set up a scholarship fund for staff members who want to study. Your dream starts now. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Richard found Maria in their usual spot in the library corner. You know, he said, I never did finish what I was trying to tell you that night. Maria smiled. About how you've fallen in love with me. Richard looked surprised, and she laughed. I'm good at reading between the lines. It's a skill you develop. When you clean offices, you learn to see what's really important. And what do you see now? Richard asked softly. I see a man who found his way back to his father's dream, she replied. A man who finally understands that love, like success, isn't about power or position. It's about lifting each other up. Their kiss was interrupted by David calling them excitedly. You need to see this. In the main hall, Victor had gathered everyone around. He stood with Rebecca and James, their father's letters in hand. These letters weren't just about the past, Victor announced. They were about the future. Each of us wrote about our dreams for our children and for this place. And at the end of each letter was a key. He held up an old brass key, matching ones held by James and Richard. We never knew what they were for, Victor continued. Until today. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, holding an ancient-looking strongbox. They brought this here the night they signed the original deed, she explained. Said it wasn't to be opened until their children found their way back to each other. The 3 keys fit perfectly. Inside, they found photographs, documents, and a handwritten message signed by all 3 men. To our children, when they finally understand, the true legacy of success is not in what you own, but in what you share. Only together can we build bridges strong enough to hold everyone's dreams. Love, Dad? The room fell silent as the message sank in. Then Sarah's voice rang out from the back. My college application is approved. I got a scholarship. Cheers erupted. Again. Richard held Maria close, watching his father's dream unfold in real time. Rebecca hugged her father, tears of joy replacing old regrets. James and David started discussing plans for the next phase of development. Outside, the city skyline stretched toward the clouds. But now, among the towers of steel and glass, new bridges were being built. Invisible but stronger than concrete, connecting dreams to reality, past to future, heart to heart. Mrs. Chen stood in her usual spot by the window, tending to her plants. Your fathers would be proud, she said to no one in particular. They always said love was the strongest foundation. As the sun set over the city, the community center glowed with light and life. Inside its walls, the past and future had finally met, and a new story was just beginning.